A painter is responding not only to the subject of what they're painting and how that's changing and shifting before their eyes, but now what is the brush doing? What is the paint doing? And what's coming out on the canvas, and responding to this thing that they're engaged with, and glass blowers responding to what the heat's doing, and the fire, and how the glass is doing this and that. Like, it's all response. It's all response. And as masterful as they are, I think that that's one of the keys to being a master, is just like, well, there's a certain level of accepting uncertain outcomes. And that really just that ability to respond, and having confidence in the ability to respond is the best thing that you have.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles,
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Well, we can't put this one off any longer, Brandon. We can't put this conversation off. Not anymore. When you can't put it off anymore, ladies and gentlemen, I think that this is something that I'm sure almost every human being on the planet can probably relate to at some level, and we took kind of an interesting journey to kind of get to this as sort of the theme of our discussion. There was a lot of things that came up in the process. We were talking about, our direction, and we were talking about, we were talking about a lot of things. We were talking about showing up, how we show up. And so I think that a lot of those things are kind of tied up into this title, but I think this is going to be a great discussion. I'm excited to see where this one heads off into, and explore a little bit about this. And I think that this is also something that in kind of different ways is relevant for each of us at this moment in time. But I mean, just to go back into sort of the general idea of this, I mean, I think how many of us have been in a situation where suddenly there's something we just can't put off anymore for whatever reason. There can be a number of reasons why it reaches that point of when you say, okay, I can't. It's not like it's an optional thing anymore. It's like, no, it's like there's no longer an option for whatever reason that is. And I think that can be sometimes, no matter what, I always think that state, when you hit that place, that's always an internal thing. That's an internal shift that occurs. But sometimes it can be triggered by something externally. Very often it happens that way, where it's like, oh, okay, I know I've been putting this thing off, but now I've got to do this. Now I've got to confront this. Now I've got to face this. Make some choices, pick a direction, and show up, I guess, to kind of wrap it all up in some of the things that we talked about. So I'm going to shut up. You take it away, Brandon.
I like that there's no other option. I like how you put that. I just think that's a great way to look at this, because procrastination is so much about having another option, that seems okay, that seems available. And when you get to this point where you can't put it off anymore, it's like those just aren't options anymore. They're done. Like, the door has closed, and it's kind of an empowering place to be. I actually personally don't like the word can't, but in this case, I feel like it's necessary, because it's not that you can't take the other options. You won't.
Mm-hmm.
But in the sentence of this podcast, it just sounds better.
Well, yeah, I think it's, there's always, you can't necessarily put like a big general rule on some of these things. Every now and then, it's just the right word. And for this one, it was.
Yeah.
You know, it's like saying, like, what if I presented you with, you can't use the word can't?
Yeah.
Don't you tell me I can't.
Well, it's also there is kind of a can't to it, because when you hit that line, when you hit that point, there, yes, you could go that way, but you wouldn't. It's so profoundly against what you would do that you're almost incapable of taking that option, because it literally like would pull on something or hurt something so much inside of you. It's those, and I think what's amazing about this, how we stumbled onto this, is how immediate it can be. Like you're going along and you're in your complacent state, you're comfortable procrastination, and all of a sudden, sometimes, like out of nowhere, maybe something happens or an insight occurs, and it's just like, no more. Like that's enough. It's done. And I can't do that anymore. And when it hits, it's profoundly motivating, and it's kind of like a fire under your ass. And I also don't think this is like kind of interesting conversation, because I don't think we're talking about how to get to that point. We're kind of talking about when you find yourself at that point. And I don't necessarily know when it will come or what needs to occur for you, but I do personally believe, and this is just my belief, so take it as you will, but that you like, if you continually kind of think about and put energy into the things you really want, and you kind of keep them in your mind, and you don't just let them die off or fade away, but like they're present and they agitate you a little, but not enough to go do something. I think if you keep them there, given enough time, like the universe or just world events or just the way you're conducting yourself in the world it will create a polarization at some point, and you'll hit this, I can't not do it anymore. I have to, it's like, it's a must now. And I think when things get to that place where they must happen, that's when you find out what you're really made of, and you find out what's really possible. But I just don't think there's a magic sauce on getting yourself to that point. I think you got to hang in the pocket until it kind of comes to you.
Yeah. And it can be a bit of a rude awakening too.
Yeah.
Because it can hit with just such a tremendous sense of urgency, and I remember hearing J.J. Abrams talk about how, like, the ideas that he develops and moves forward with are the ones that gnaw at him, the ones that just won't go away, the ones that will just like, they just won't leave him alone. He's got, it sounds like he has a fairly interesting process in that, he's got a lot of different ideas for a lot of different projects and what have you. And he'll just sort of let a bunch of them sit in and marinate, I guess. And a lot of them will just kind of disappear. They'll just fade away, but there'll be ones that just continue to like come back up and be like, oh yeah, I was thinking about doing that thing. I was thinking about doing this project. That could be really cool. And it just keeps on coming back and keeps on coming back. I think that's, can be a good indication of is these, maybe it's the to-do list, or it's the curiosity, the, some direction that you've had some sort of an impulse to go towards, that, you've been sitting on for a long time. It that just keeps on coming back up, and it can come up in all kinds of different forms, and eventually say like, all right, finally I'm fed up enough, in some way, like it was, as you were saying, like it was an option before to not do it. It was an option before to choose to do something else over doing this. But suddenly that other option is no longer an option. and this thing has to be given its time, has to be given its attention. And I mean, definitely, you don't have to be an artist, but I think that artists are some of like the most sophisticated procrastinators that you will ever meet in your entire life. If you don't really have a lot of artists in your life, take my word for it. Speaking as an artist who's put a lot of things off, and continues to do so. There's a lot of different kind of creative things that come up that just kind of sit and grow stagnant. And then there's the ones that go, okay, now I've got to do this. Now, like, for example, just for myself personally, like I'm in the final stages of self-publishing a book that I've been working on for years. And it's at a point where I think of it almost as like, it's this monkey on my back. Like I've got to get this monkey off of my back because this book is just like, it's just whining at me. It's just complaining at me. It's just like, how come I'm not out there yet? How come we're not finished? We've been like, come on, like, what are we doing here? You're going to let this one, like, you're not going to let this just sit on the shelf. You're not going to let this just, fade away into the ether. I'm like, I know I'm not going to do that. It's like, okay, so let's do this thing. It's interesting. It's like a conversation you're having with this thing that you've been involved with creating, or this thing that wants to be created, that's having this conversation with you. It's the muse. It's the, there's all kinds of different words that we could have for it. But, there's this relationship and this dialogue that you have with whatever this thing is. And finally, it's just, it's confronting you in a way that you can't ignore.
Yeah, totally. I was thinking about not just in like a creative project, but like a path. And 100%. With your book, for example, it's like a path, right? Like there's this path that it's like calling you to go down that path, like publish the book is the path, right? And it's like, there's this kind of like, like I'm making my way, I'll get there, kind of process to it. And then there's just a certain point where it's like, I got to go and see what's down there. And it's like the staying where you are, the not doing it. That's a part of it with me. It's like, this, like, I don't know what it is. It's like, there's this way in life that you want to go, and it's so easy to kind of dance around that way, and
because there's so much meaning in
yeah
that way. I think, like, just to touch on a lot of other conversations we've had, but why don't we just pursue the things that we care about most? Why do we so often put it off? And a lot of the time it's because it means so much that it becomes scary. I want you to continue, but I just want to throw that in there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I hear that. We make too much of it, in that respect. And that can sometimes, but it's difficult because it's like, you do want to make this stuff important. It is important. And, you want to put care and mindfulness into it. You don't want to just do things half-assed or half-baked or whatever, however you want to put it, right? Like, but also the will to go fully into something is frightening, to really leap into it, to try it, but to quote one of our favorite, not even properly quote him, but kind of the essence, Alan Watts, right? But I was listening to an Alan Watts, and he was talking about like love, for example. And like love is like that, it's like, if you never allow yourself to like love, to like really love, and to love with like abandon, like to trust, to put yourself in the hands of that person to some degree, or the hands of that thing, it's like you've never really lived, and there's this, I think that when you can't put it off anymore is when you realize that like you can't not live this anymore. Like you got to try. And I think we're so scared of outcomes. We're so scared of like things going wrong that we forget to live, you know, and it's just this, it's a confusion because like the life is what matters, you know, and like I think when you go for whatever you're going to go for, there's inevitably going to be things that, you know, you're not going to like if you choose to love a thing, a path, a person, anything, you're going to get hurt. It might not be betrayal. It might not be like devastating hurt in that respect, but you're going to hurt because that comes with the territory. You know, it comes with the, you know, you're going to write a book and maybe it's the most brilliant book in the world. And then someone's going to say, oh, it's a piece of shit. I hate this book. But you know, it's going to hurt to some degree. Right. And you just have to accept that that's part of what going that way entails. And so it's like, there's a certain point, I think, where you go like, I don't care about that anymore. You know, I don't care about the consequences I was like so scared to face. And how you get to that, I mean, I don't necessarily know, but I just know that there's been multiple times in my life where I just can't put it off anymore. And I always kind of, I guess I have enough experience with it now when I kind of like love it. Like I love when that happens. But I think when it first starts happening, it's more like, it's not like well, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's different for different scenarios and different people, but I found it often is not like comfortable and fun. It's more like fucking angry and like sometimes there's fury behind it, but it like sometimes it's not, but sometimes it's like agitation, you know, or you know, maybe it's not a can do, but a cannot do anymore. Like you're in a relationship and then you just realize like this relationship is sucking the life out of me. Like I got to get out of this. I got to walk away. I got to cut this off. And when you make that choice, it's so empowering, but it didn't come from like a beautifully like fun place. Sometimes these things come from like this really hard place, like this ugly looking place, but that ugliness is a gift. And I think that's part of this whole conversation. You know, sometimes it's like an example that I do with the course that I run. You know, we do this like, what do you call it? Basically testing like territory, you know, testing your boundaries. But it's like, if you knew you were going to die today, what would you do? Right. If you knew you were going to die in a week, what would you do? If you knew you were going to die in a month, what would you do? If you knew you were going to die in a year, what would you do? If you knew you were going to die in 10 years, what would you do? And the answers for all those are different. But when you stop and you think about it, they initiate action because you go, well, I'm not going to go to work today if I'm going to die today. Like, fuck that. Fuck everything that's like a dislike. But if it's a year from now, you're not going to maybe throw that stuff away. You know what I mean? And these can't put it off anymore. They kind of come with this like certain sense of like death is almost a part of it. You know what I mean? Like something in me is going to die if I don't do this, or something in me is going to die if I stay with this, you know? And you just become all of a sudden aware of that. And it's metaphorical. It's not literal most often, but that metaphorical death becomes so evident that you're like, I can't fucking do this anymore. Like I can't not do this anymore. I have to, it must happen, because you're like, if I stay at this job any fucking longer, I'm going to die. This is going to be like the part of me that is alive is going to die here. And then that job just becomes so clearly not the path anymore, you know, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not talking from experience or anything.
But it can be, again, it can take many different types of forms, you know, like we're just talking about anything that can come up in your life that has that quality of like, I can't do this anymore, or I can't, I can't avoid this anymore. I can't, put this off anymore, as we've been talking about. I wonder if there's, a way that we can, as you've been sort of touching on something that I think is kind of important, or can be an important element of this conversation, which is that who is the person that you want to be? What kind of person is it that you want to be can be a huge way of helping us to get clarity, and as well as helping us to deal with that procrastination, that procrastination monkey that's that likes to crawl around on your shoulders and in your head and all those things. Because I think that when we reach that point, we can end up looking at it in a way with like a great deal of heaviness that comes with it. Like, oh my God, like I've been wasting my life. I've been wasting my time. And there can be something useful to that sense of, again, urgency that feeling can give you to make some choices and pick some directions in your life, or pick a new direction to go into. But I think maybe that's a good first step as far as looking at it in a better light, as opposed to going down a thought ditch, I suppose, of like, I've been wasting my time, because that can just lead to more procrastination. That can just lead to unnecessary, sort of self-flagellation, in the whole thing, where it's like, maybe it's just that whole experience that you've been going through, the sort of the pattern of life that you have been on for the last however long it's been. Maybe that was the thing that was completely necessary to get you to this point, to really realize what's important to you, because you couldn't see it before then. Not even if somebody came up and said it to you straight in the face, you wouldn't have been able to receive it. You wouldn't have really understood it had you not been through the experiences that you have been through. But, I think of just kind of who's the kind of person that I want to be when I recognize that there's something that I can't put off anymore. Like when I have that recognition in myself, it's like, oh, here's this thing in my life, and it has now forced my attention upon it, in a very profound and powerful way. And for me, I go, just like, what? I just want to laugh. I think I want to be able to laugh at those situations. Not that I'm not taking it to heart, but like a good friend, or someone who loves me dearly. Here's this thing. Here's this book that's just like, hey, let's publish this book, you idiot. And it's just like, okay, all right. I can laugh because like, all right, it's time. You've made your point known, and let's do this and do it joyfully, as opposed to like, I'm running out of time in a frenetic, sort of rush for some kind of completion, because that's not really what the whole thing is about either. Like with any sort of worthwhile endeavor that we set out upon, part of what makes it worthwhile is because it creates a journey that we want. It creates an in-between that we want. Because as we've talked about many times on the show, most of life is that in-between. Life is rarely about the arrival. The arrival happens, like if you you take any sort of sport, for example, it's the goals that are scored, are such a small part of it, and there's the celebration and there's like all the stuff that comes with that. But then it's over. That moment's over. It doesn't matter anymore, and now most of it is this other thing that's going on in between all of the, the goals or to bring up, Alan Watts again, who we love so much. He brings up a great sort of metaphor that, if music was just about like the big grand finish at the end, it's like, then like that's all anyone would ever write. They would just write ends. But that's not how music works, and it's kind of a silly way to think about music. It's like, no, the music is a whole moment to moment experience of sound flowing and moving, and then it leads sometimes to a big sort of finish, particularly within something like classical. But that's not all that it's about. There's this whole journey that happens up to that point that makes that point meaningful. So I may have gotten a little off track here, but all I really meant to say was just that, like, we don't need to go about these things that we've been putting off. Once we recognize that we have been putting it off, we don't need to pursue after it like we're in a race against the clock, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like a race against death or something.
I hear that, and I think that's a really good point. I think you bring in a really good point. And I think that, one of the things that I've been learning, and it's been a big life lesson that I've been kind of learning over and over, is to be kind to myself, and I think I'd give that advice to really anybody and reiterate what I've learned. Because, like laughing at it and kind of being like, you're being so silly, man. You're being so silly, doing this and putting that off. And kind of, it doesn't have to be this kind of ugly thing, like, I've wasted time and I'm, it can be this kind of like,
you can celebrate it.
You can celebrate it. Yeah. You can be your own friend, like, I think also the other thing too that I'm going to mention as we kind of go into this is like, maybe doing it before, it wasn't that you didn't want to or didn't have the will to do it. It's that you didn't have like the confidence, and I think like sometimes you're ready when you're ready, and all of a sudden you're confident enough and you're just like, you just realize like, I could do it. And then you do it, and then you can't put it off anymore because now you suddenly realize you could do it. Like you have that belief in yourself, that trust in yourself. And that kind of awakening is kind of exciting, if I can, I'll share a story actually. I'll try to keep it brief.
Of course you can.
So this weekend I went on a hike, and as you guys know who have been listening, I've been going on these adventures and pushing myself to explore. And on this one, I got to this waterfall, and then it got like to this area where it's like hazardous. Like it's like you can die, and there's even signs like this is a hazardous area and blah, 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 and all that. And they were not kidding. Like, as I got into this area, it definitely tested me. I don't really like, I'm not scared of heights, but to a certain point, they start to become really uncomfortable for me. Being on it started to pour rain when I was in this area. So having it be like super wet and like muddy and puddly and all this water was coming off the rocks onto me and stuff. It starts to get like, a little bit more treacherous. And so I'm hiking up these waterfalls, and at one point I'm like on a cliff edge, and it's like 50, 60 feet of like a 90-foot drop, and there's no railing, there's no nothing. It's just like It's just you and nature. And then I got to this point where it wasn't just like, it was probably, maybe the part was like 30 or 40 feet of a straight drop, but I was like, I had to shimmy along the side of a cliff, and it's like, and I'm like, people walk this path? This is like nuts. This is like something you see on YouTube. And I stood there for a minute and I was like, maybe I shouldn't do this because like I could get hurt or die. And, I had that kind of moment with myself. And then I was like, no, I came up here to do this. This is the kind of adventure I want. And I want to be the kind of guy that does these types of things. And I don't think it was so dangerous that it was crazy, but it was dangerous enough where if you're not careful and you're not confident, you could get hurt. But I was like, I'm confident enough. I can do this. And I did it. I shimmied along the side of this rock, and over this waterfall like edge. And then I got to the other part. And then like I got into this other area and then it would start to get really foresty, but there was still kind of a path. But like, I'm like, I don't know where I am anymore. I'm starting to get lost and it's twisting and turning. And I'm like, what if I can't find my way back? And I'm, it's starting to get a little darker because I left a little later. All these things are going on in my mind, right? But I'm like, that confidence is what kept me going forward. It's like, look, I know how to handle myself. I know where the water is. I know where the waterfall is because I can hear it. I've been in these situations before. I know how to navigate through the woods. There's a certain amount of like, I can keep going forward. And it's like, I couldn't go back because there was this part of me that's like, it's that point where you're like, it's so easy to just put it off. It's so easy to kind of do the thing that's like comfortable. And I think that, finding your way is kind of like that. You find these things and they're like scary and you kind of go like, am I up to it? Am I capable of it? And when you are, it's kind of like, well, why wouldn't I? You know what I mean? Like, and I feel like, yeah, there was a moment of fear, but it was fun. It was an experience. And as I did it, as I was doing it, and as I did it, I was like, there's so few people that have done this. There's so few people that have been able to adventure here where I'm going. I'm not the only one, but I'm in an area that very few people get to really experience. And I was like, there's something special about that. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
that was a moment, like that was a hiking moment, an exploration hiking moment that I will never forget. That was truly like a little bit like Tomb Raider, kind of like, like literally like, this is fucking like, this is a video game, but, and some people will look at that and they'll go like, that's stupid. And some people look at that and go, wow, I wish I could do it. And some people go, where is it?
Yeah.
But, I think like a lot of things are like that. Your dream, your creative projects, they're like that cliff edge. And it's like, there's a certain amount, it's like, I might be able to do this. And actually, I think I can. And then it kind of just becomes about, doing it as opposed to like how well you do it. And the other thing is, and I know I'm talking a lot here, but I talk about this a lot with the course that I do, where it's like, I talk about confidence because I feel like that's a really important element. But like, to me, confidence is like when you're on a cliff and the cliff starts giving way, if you know how to handle that, that's not a problem. Like, how to put your hand to like create like 3 points of contact. You know how to do stuff like that. You have a certain amount of confidence. You don't worry about things going wrong because you know how to do these things. When you have no experience in it, you don't have that confidence, right? So a lot of hiking and being able to get to the point where I could do that cliff and then maybe even more adventurous stuff is continually testing it, continually trying it, continually doing it. And then you're not just going from like 0 to like big risk. You've incrementally made your way there. And then those increments become like, well, what's another increment, as opposed to like this big, massive thing you're doing all of a sudden.
Totally. Yeah. You bring in a lot of really cool things that I think are worth talking about. I wanted to say something as well about this thing of sort of confidence. And you touched on it in your story about hiking, where, you know, we seem to think that like confidence is just this thing of like, you know, you've got, you know, your chest is puffed out and you're just marching through, you know, like you're, you know, king shit. And that's I would say that's probably very rarely the case, that's the situation. You know, sometimes confidence is just that you now, from some place inside of you, you just have the courage to put pen to paper where you didn't have that courage before. You know, you didn't have that confidence. Doesn't mean that you're still not unsure about a lot of what you're doing. It doesn't mean that you're without doubts, but you've had the confidence to do something. You've had the confidence to sort of show up for yourself to a certain extent. You've had just that little bit of something to get you moving, to get you in action. And I think it's important to recognize that is confidence. You might not feel that way, but it's something that you have now that you didn't have before. Because before you thought about putting that pen to paper and you just couldn't, for whatever reason. You just couldn't do it. But now you can. For some reason, you can. That's a shift. And it doesn't mean that you have to be able to define it and narrow it down. I think that could be a waste of energy. You know, it's just like, just accept it. Just take it for what it is. And it's like, okay, for some reason I'm able to do this now. And I wasn't able to before. And, you know, I think that a lot of this comes down to trust as well. You know, certainly there are situations that we've heard about or maybe even experienced where we have bitten off more than we can chew. Or we've heard a story of someone else who's bitten more than they can chew, and even to disastrous and fatal outcomes. You know, I don't want to be ignorant about that. You know, there are people who make foolish decisions when they don't have the capabilities to do what they're trying to undertake. That does happen. But I think that most people have a pretty good sense about what's beyond for them. Like, I'm sure that there could have been a number of situations on your hike, Brandon, that had they presented themselves to you, you would have been like, no.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm just not going to do that. That's no way. Right. But
yeah,
there are certain things that we can meet. And I would also like to say that I believe that people who do truly get themselves into big trouble are people who they're, whatever it is that they're doing it for the wrong reasons. You know what I mean? Like, they're doing it out of some sort of weird ego game that they've got going with themselves and with other people. There's some sort of sense of trying to prove something to someone, and that can get you in a lot of trouble. But when you're doing something like what you are doing, or, you know, even something that, like writing a script, you know, you've always wanted to write a script and you just haven't had the courage to do that. I mean, you can do that. What's going to happen? Yeah. What the fuck is going to happen if you write that script? You know, it's just like, there's no reason why you can't. Like, there's no reason why you can't. There's no promise that it's going to be good. You might write an absolute piece of trash, but you would have done it. and it won't be that thing that's gnawing at you anymore, but maybe it's great. I don't know. It's not necessarily always the point. You allowed yourself to do something that you felt compelled to do, that you couldn't put off anymore. You allowed yourself to do that. Leave the rest. Leave all the other shit to I don't know who you leave it to, but don't leave it to someone or something else. But, taking that action and following through on that thing, to bring it back around. It's like, that is an act of, it's definitely an act of courage, but it is an act of confidence. That's a confidence that you didn't have before that you now have.
Man, there's a lot of stuff I really like about what you said. I'm going to kind of list it off because I want to point them out. One was that confidence doesn't always look like your chest is pumped out and you're like, I'm king shit. Yeah, sometimes it really is just that simple. You're just putting pen to paper, and and we don't always look at that as a courageous act, but I think that's such a, to try to do some of this stuff, we don't give ourselves credit. So I would say, like, anybody out there who, maybe you're not giving yourself credit for some of the courageous things that you're doing, some of the things that are really, like, they're really important. They really matter. And, sometimes these things, they're not going to go anywhere, but the fact that you're going out and doing that, to reference back to the hike, like, yeah, sure, I talk about this podcast and the hike, but, like, it was just me. I was alone. I did the hike, and it doesn't matter to anybody but me, but I did it. And I'm proud of myself for that. I'm proud of myself for, and I feel more capable than I ever did before. I feel more capable because I did it. And, to some people who are, like, really, like, big time adventurers, they're probably like, oh, whatever, I go across cliffs all the time. It's like, well, good for you. I mean, that's amazing. But, like, for me, this is somewhat new. Some of this stuff is not, I've, like, and I love how another thing you pointed out is there would have been certain things on that hike had I come across certain obstacles I wouldn't have done. And that's kind of, and I know that to be true. There's certain things that become too risky, too scary, too much. And I think it's important to know that you have limits, you have boundaries on what you'll do. And that brings me back to the next point you mentioned, which was, like, doing it for the right reasons. If I was doing it because I was trying to prove something to somebody else, or trying to be somebody, or look good, or whatever, or have a story to tell, those are not good reasons to, like, go do something like that. I was doing it because, to me, like, I don't know, I've gotten to a point in my life where I've come to realize that there are certain things that if I don't start doing them, I will never do them. They will never happen. And I may not always be capable of doing them. And so there's certain things that I'm like, I want to do that. That's going to be a part of my life. And I don't even know what all of those things are until sometimes I meet them. And I met this cliff, and it was like, no, I want this to be a part of my life. This is an experience that I want in my life. And I think the fear came up at that moment, and and just all of that stuff. And I think the decision point was, I could turn back, and that's a safe choice. I could totally do that, or I could do this. And doing it was like, I want to have this experience, and it's not for anybody but me. And I think that was a good reason for me to go and do it. It wasn't about, I assessed the risk, I considered it, and it was an act of fulfillment. And, being that this is way of the artist, I think that's a good metaphor for a lot of the philosophy we talk about. When you go your own way, that's what it needs to be. It needs to be for you, not for somebody else, not because you need to prove something to somebody, not because you're trying to look good, not because you need to prove something to yourself, but, like, we're in the middle of everything so much, like, all the time, really. We're in process. And when you look at, like, what you're doing, you might start going, like, I can't not give myself that, I have to, like, it's a must. when you get to those moments.
You know, the word that's popping into my head as you were talking is response. You know, I think sometimes, you know, I think that a great any great sort of artist, and I use that term somewhat loosely, but anyone who's creating something in whatever capacity that is, I think that, you know, sort of the great artist, the master artist, never has necessarily the confidence that they can do something, but they have the confidence to respond. They have the confidence that they can respond to what will come up from this, whatever direction that they've chosen to go, you know, and in some way, maybe it might be the same thing. It's like, well, I can do this, but I don't know, again, what that's going to look like. I mean, I might do it, but it might amount to nothing. It might not go anywhere. It might not do anything, you know, but whatever it is, response, you know, like one of my acting mentors would say, you know, that, you know, he said that response and adjustment are two of the big, you know, like the essential tools in any actor's, you know, toolbox, which is kind of a funny thing because they're not even really necessarily tools. They're just, you know, it's just something that we develop a capacity and an ability to do is to respond. But I think it's the same within almost any art form that I sort of looked at and sort of studied and had any fascination with, however briefly that is. There's some sort of a response. You know, like a painter is responding not only to the subject of what they're painting and how that's changing and shifting before their eyes, but now what is the brush doing? What is the paint doing? And what's coming out on the canvas and responding to this thing that they're engaged with, and glass blowers responding to what the heat's doing and the fire and how the glass is doing this and that. Like, it's all response. It's all response. And as masterful as they are, I think that that's one of the keys to being a master is just like, well, there's a certain level of accepting uncertain outcomes. And that really just that ability to respond, you know, and having confidence in the ability to respond is the best thing that you have. And I think that, yeah, and the more that you sort of test that, the more that you sort of put yourself in that position, the more confidence you sort of build in that way.
Definitely. Yeah, then, you know, something I'm thinking about as you were talking was about, you know, we talk a lot about purpose, but we've often called it your calling. And your calling is asking for you to respond. It's calling you and it wants you to respond. And
yeah.
And I just kind of put that together, and I'm like, yeah, like on the other side of that cliff edge, where that journey took me into this other amazingly untouched, beautiful part of this, well, it was touched to some degree, but like almost untouched wilderness where very few had ever gone because very few had walked that, you know, I'm sure. Because it became more and more, what's the word? You know, the foliage became much more natural, you know, less worn as I got past that point. And, you know, there's a calling on the other side of that. And I had a response, you know, and I think like, that's kind of when you can't put it off anymore, is when that response is the only option. You know, it's like, I got to respond. I got to respond to where I'm being called to now. And, you know, there's that exercise or that thought experiment that's done often in acting classes. And I'm sure many people have heard this one, but like, what would you crawl through broken glass for? You know, when you find that, like, when you love something enough, you'll crawl through broken glass, which is just a horrible, horrible fucking image of imagining actually doing that. But there are certain things where they matter so much, they're so important that you're willing to put yourself through sometimes pain to protect it or take care of it or get to it. But I think like a lot of the time, 99.9% of the time, it's not crawling through broken glass. It's actually a really joyous experience. It's not a painful one. And I think we do notice those one very rare painful things, but most of the time it's actually a really cool and fun experience. Like there was before the cliff, there was walking along the cliff edge, and then there was afterwards. And before there was a bit of fear and trepidation. Afterwards, there was obviously the reward. And hey, I fucking did that. And like looking back. And then, but in the middle, it wasn't painful. It was like, I'm doing this and wow. And getting a sense of self on there and being like, this isn't so bad, and I got this. And like kind of a, wow, this is really cool. Like, like all these things were going on during the process of doing it. And I think that if you were to just to take the beginning, like where there's fear and trepidation, and project that through the entire experience, you don't know what's going to happen on the other side. If you respond, you might find out that those things that are holding you back, they're actually temporary. Because that wasn't that scary when I was in the middle. Not for me. I mean, maybe for someone else it might have been, but I actually wasn't scared in the middle. In the middle, I had already decided to do it. So there was no fear anymore. That was gone. The fear for me was not in doing it, but in deciding to do it, which I think there's a good lesson for that. For me, it's like, I think a lot of things are like that for me. It's like, I'm scared to do them, but once I'm doing them, I'm not scared anymore. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, I can relate a lot to that. And that's something I've observed, many occasions just through, in friends and family. There's all of this stress and anxiety about something, and then once the decision made, it's gone. It just evaporates. It's the indecision that'll kill you.
Yeah, totally.
It's the fence sitting that that starts to stab you in the ass, right?
Totally. That picket fence that's in your ass.
That's right, man. That picket fence in the ass. That's what'll get you. The grass on the other side ain't so bad at all.
See, that's a fun way to look at procrastination. Like, do I want to keep sitting on this fence in my ass? Like laugh at the fact that you're standing still, not making a decision. It's like, it's kind of like, something I'm realizing as we're having this conversation is I came into it very like, oh yeah, like that point comes where you just can't anymore and you got to go. But now I'm a little bit more like, well, sometimes it's like that, but sometimes it's a little bit more like, hey man, like I'm tired of waiting around. Let's go shit or get off the pot. Like, let's do one or the other. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. and like even the saying shit or get off the pot is funny in and of itself.
Yeah.
It's like, I think there's a certain amount of like playfulness and fun that can come into this whole concept, which I was not seeing in the beginning of this conversation. Mm-hmm. But like, I mean, why not? Why not be playful with it? Why not have some fun and, be kind to yourself and enjoy it, make it an adventure.
Yeah. No, that's something that surprised me about this conversation as well. And for me, it really kind of came out of this like, oh yeah, if I looked at this thing that I'm putting off, right, as kind of this living, breathing entity that's speaking to me, it's just like, oh well, now I'm in some sort of communion with this thing, some sort of relationship to this thing, and I have to respond to it. It keeps on talking to me, and it's just like, and it's tired of being ignored now, and it's now kind of like put me down, like it's set me down in a chair, and it's looked me in the eye and said like, look, are we doing this or are we not doing this? Because if you're not doing this, then I'm gonna go and find someone else who's gonna do this with me, right? And just be like, okay, I get it. Thanks for sticking around.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you giving me the benefit of the doubt. Let's do this. All right.
Yeah, totally.
And being like, yeah, I'm still shitting my pants a little bit about this, but whatever. That's part of the fun. It's that step into the that step into the unknown that brings us to life. You know, and that's part of why we do it. We need that little element of that sort of cliff edge, as you brought up, that I've got to shimmy across this thing. It's not necessarily asking me to start paragliding, down a mountainside with no experience. It's just saying like, well, can you just shimmy across over there? It's like, yeah, I can shimmy across over there. It's like, yeah, there you go. Exhilarating. Keep going. Keep going.
No. This has been really good, man. I love how these conversations go sometimes, where they start off one way and I see them one way, and then throughout the conversation I realized that the way that I saw them was actually very limited, because now I know that I've walked away, or will walk away, with an expanded view of this concept. And I think that's a lesson that I've been kind of reminded of many times in many different ways, but to have fun with this stuff, like it doesn't have to be doom and gloom and scary and serious and dramatic all the time, and I think I have a tendency sometimes to go down that road, that can be my filter. And as we're having this conversation, I mean, I attribute it to you, but you help me see that like there can be a lightness to a lot of this stuff. It doesn't have to be it just doesn't have to be so scary. It doesn't have to be so painful and so hard. And I do think pain is a great motivator. Don't get me wrong. I think it helps. But also pain is often temporary, pain doesn't have to be constant. I think when we experience pain as constant, it's more like we're suffering, like in our heads, than it actual is pain. Because, usually pain, not always, but usually pain is very brief. And I don't just mean pain like physical. I mean, sometimes pain is like fear or, anger or upsetness is like painful, right? Sadness even sometimes. But once you get past the pain point, you actually often, at least I should say, I often find myself in a state of joy and wonder. And it kind of reminds me like, well, focus on the joy and wonder, don't get so caught up in the painful moment,
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think of something that Dan Millman said. Either said, or I can't remember if because I saw him do a speech one time, and it might have been both actually, that he said it and I read it in a book, but I remember him going, pain is inevitable, suffering is an option. Yeah. I know that I've always liked that one. It's just like, oh yeah. I like it.
Yeah, I've heard that one before. It's I think like Buddha said something like life is suffering, but like it can be, like it can be suffering, but it's only if that's what you put your attention on,
yeah.
But there is kind
and
of,
I think that was actually his point, because a lot of people get stuck on that. Like that's I think that's I just, sorry, I've got to comment on this here quickly, because
comment on it.
I just very quickly, because that's something that, I hear people throw that around with sort of a misunderstanding about it. And it's like, well, the Buddha just said that life is suffering. It's like, yes, he did, but he didn't say that as kind of like the conclusion to his to his philosophy. It was the beginning of a conversation, and I think you kind of touched on part of that, which is just like, well, it's about attention. It's about what, for the most part, as a humanity, we've been putting our attention on, and that is what's causing the suffering.
I hear you, because people often quote that from the Buddha as though that was the only thing he said, as though that was like
the last word.
Yeah, and it's like, no, I mean, suffering is the state of not making a decision. Suffering is the state of being caught on a point of focus. It's like, but I think that like suffering is one of those things like, once you become aware that you're in control of it and you do it, you don't want to do it anymore, But the only reason why people suffer, and I think like going into like psychology, people suffer because they get something out of it. And, there's like, you get something, everything you do, you get something out of. And I mean, I'm not saying that like, I don't have my suffering moments, but like, why are you suffering? Like once you hit the point of acceptance and you just accept that it is what it is, there's no point to suffer anymore. But suffering's like the refusal of acceptance. It's like, yeah, like, like your body's in pain. You can just, oh, my body's in pain, my body's in pain, my body's in pain. You can just keep focusing. At a certain point, if you just go, okay, my body's in pain. This is where I'm at. So now what am I going to do? You know what I mean? It's like, let's move on. When I was, I'm going back to the same example because it's helpful for me to use it. But like before I walked along the cliff edge, there was suffering. But when I was walking along it and when I got to the end and everything beyond that, there was no suffering. It was over. The suffering was the fear, the what if something bad happens, all that. And I think like I accepted that those were all things that were possible. And I was like, hey, I mean, that's a risk. And actually, it reminds me of, and I want to point this out because something that we talked about before we got into this conversation was betting on yourself, and I feel like this is an example too of like when you bet on yourself, when you go like, I'm going to put money down, I'm going to put something on the line here that I could do this. Like I could write this script. I could walk this cliff edge. I could get up and play this part. You know what I mean? As an actor, whatever it might be, or I could figure out how to make this song. And it's like, at some point you got to bet on you, And I think that like, part of this conversation is like when you can't not bet on you anymore, that's kind of the point. It's like, at what point is it going to be where you're going to stop betting against yourself and start betting on yourself?
Yeah. Start giving yourself like vouch for yourself.
Yeah.
Vouch for yourself. That's just like, and again, and also show up for yourself. Yeah, that was another thing. Show up for yourself. That was another thing that led us into this conversation is like, because that's the same thing. You can call it bet, but you could also just call it like, when are you going to show up for you? When are you going to show up and just be there with you, for you, to let you live the life you want to live. Mm-hmm. And it's not a selfish thing.
No.
Because the way that I think that we're trying to talk about something like that, about showing up for yourself, is it's about showing up for the truest parts of who you are. And when you do that everybody benefits from that.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like the greatest sort of figures of human history are the ones who showed up for themselves. The greatest contributors to the well-being of all of humanity are the ones who showed up for themselves, because they showed up for that thing that wouldn't be put off anymore. You know what I mean? Like that thing is just like, hey, what if we invented this thing? What if we created this thing? What if we brought this into the world? What if we did these things?
Most of the best product businesses, inventions, were created because someone made something to help their own life.
Yeah.
They figured out something because they were trying to do something in their life and they wanted something. And so they decided to create it. And then they create a business out of that. I mean, it's not selfish. It's self-full. It's self-fulfilling, And I think that we need to reframe our minds around this whole concept of selfish as well, because it's like just because you're doing something for you doesn't mean that you're taking away from someone else, you know? And by the way, I also think that we need to be our own best friends. I think that's more important now more than ever. Like we need to be there for ourselves. We need to be kind to ourselves. We need to talk to ourselves with compassion and care. And, man, I'm going to get on a soapbox right now. Just say like everybody out there, if you're listening, like be better to you, because when you're better to you, you're going to start making the decisions that you need to make that are going to lead you down the path that you want to go. And I would argue that the reason why you're not going down the path you want to go, or you're not going as fast, or you're not going as direct, is because you're not being kind enough to you. And I'm saying that to everyone out there as much as I'm saying it to me, because I realize I had a friend I talked to this morning. We had a great conversation. And he pointed out, he said, Brandon, the fact that you have become who you become and you made the choices you made to get where you are based on where you started, you should be very proud of yourself, because a lot of people, they don't do that. They give into it, and they don't try to change, and they don't try to do anything. They just let it take them. Mm-hmm. And, and and it really reminded me, it's like, things might not be perfect. Things might not work out always the way you want them to do. But like every time you choose to be more of who you want to be, that's a win, and even if you haven't up to this point, I mean, hey, you got to start at some point, right? So start today, start now.
Yeah. Now is always the creative point of life.
Yeah. How's your beer?
It's good, man. It's good. I felt like the dude there.
It's good, man. Yeah. My rug.
Yeah, it's good, man. Shit's come to light, and yeah, no, it's good. I'm having another one from Red Truck. I had a Red Truck last week, but this is a different one. This is called Haulin' Some Mass New England Hazy IPA. So the last one, it was like one of those boxes that comes with it came with like 2 different IPAs in it.
Oh yeah.
So the other one was like a Citra, and this is a hazy, and it's good. It's real good. It's such a funny thing. Like if anyone out there, like especially if you're like from the Vancouver area, and Red Truck, that like Red Truck Lager is like probably like their best selling, most famous beer, and I think it's absolute garbage. Like I think it's terrible. But they make all of this other beer that's so good, so it's one of those baffling things to me. It makes me wonder sometimes, like, if it's like, is there a person who's brewing the beer over there who's just like, I can't stand the lager, but lots of people seem to like it and they're buying it, so we can't change the recipe. So they just got to keep making it. But in the meantime, they're making all these other really great brews. So yeah, no, it's good. It's really
Somebody's got to like the lager. I have one thing about lager. The one thing about lager is it's kind of hard to mess up. I mean, it's just a little more watery most of the time. You know what I mean? Like, but I think of all the beer types, the lager it kind of has the most similarity from one brand to the next, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I feel like when you start getting into, the IPAs and other things and, variations, then you start to really see what a brewery can do. Yeah. But yeah, I hear you. Red Truck has got a lot of good stuff outside of their main most famous one. I'm not saying I agree with everything you said about not liking it, but I hear you.
That's fine.
All right. Is this beer called Tululu? Is that what that says?
Tulu? There's only one L in there.
Tulu? Tulu? That sounds right. Tulu. Okay, well, it's called Tulu. It's a Seal and Oak. I didn't even know it was by Seal and Oak. I just was like, oh, that looks like a cool can. Let's grab that. But this is India Pale Ale with passion fruit, orange, and guava.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, I know a lot of fruit and flavor. It's very flavorful. It's very tasty. I would say that it's kind of one of those beers you like have one of, and then you kind of move on.
Yeah.
But it's good. I like it. It's very flavorful. Definitely a positive experience, but like also 6.5% alcohol. So hey, go for that. But here's a little thing about this beer. I want to put this. I didn't even know this when I picked it up. I just noticed it. It was brewed by the women of Steel and Oak, and to celebrate International Women's Day. So partial proceeds from this beer actually get donated to that. So there you go, women. I'm supporting you. Didn't even know it. But this beer's to you, ladies.
Amazing. And you're enjoying it too. So there you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a good conversation, man.
Yes.
It's taken some twists and turns, and there's been some cool discoveries in here as far as just having a kind of a sense of lightness around that moment of realization, which, there's this beautiful balance to be found there in that, you know what, like, we don't have forever, we don't. And that sense of urgency of like, I can't put this off anymore. There's something really beautiful about that. There's something that, that fire that can light is terrific. But that we don't need to kind of stay in that space, and that we can have a different kind of relationship to that moment of like, okay, I'm moving on this, I'm taking action on this thing. But now it's time to play. It's time to, maybe laugh at that thing, to laugh at what I've been doing, to laugh at kind of, how, my own errors and silliness, it's not, that it's not quite so serious, and you know what, to bring them back in for the third time in this conversation, Alan Watts, one of the best things I've ever heard him say, at least for me, is don't take life seriously, take it sincerely. And I think that it's just I've always loved that. It's always stuck in there, and it's come back up for this conversation. But yeah, it's like, you don't need to take it seriously, but take it sincerely. Because otherwise, life can become a real drag. But if you take it sincerely, you can play the game, and you can have a lot of fun, and you can have passion, and you can pursue passion. There's, it opens up all kinds of doors. You can engage with life in a way that is meaningful, that is urgent, but is full of lightness and beauty. So I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Well, that's great. I think you pointed out some great stuff there, Evan. This has been a really good one. There's been some discoveries for me on this one, so I'm really happy about that, because every conversation is always great. But sometimes when you walk away and you really feel like you shifted some things, it reminds me of where we started and why we even started having these conversations, because, we would talk and then we would kind of have shifts, and it would help us in our creative careers and our pursuits and stuff. I just like to remind everybody, it's like, there is no such thing as wasted time. It's all life. Everything is life. You're living, you're doing your best, and there's no judgment. No matter what, even if you felt misguided, you've always been doing your best in your own way. And I think that it's important to remind yourself of that, and be kind to yourself, and don't worry about where you are or where you could have been. You are where you are, and you can start here today. And I think the big thing that I want to kind of just leave everybody with that I took away and will continue to kind of think about moving forward is that you have a calling, and it's asking you to respond, and I think that's the big takeaway here. It's like, at what point can you not respond anymore? At what point is it going to be where responding to this calling is the only option? And I think when you find yourself there, I think you're going to give yourself something in life it just makes everything worthwhile.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you got something out of this, if you feel it improved your life or your journey in any way, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode.
You can also support us on Patreon, where we have tons of great bonuses. You are the ones that make the show possible and help us to thrive. Thank you for joining us.